The dry ground of Turkana cracks under the feet of those born there. The sky is wide, cloudless, and the horizon seems to never change. There is no hospital, no shade, no promises. Everything that exists pulses between the red dust, the unrelenting heat, and the silent resilience of a people who have learned to survive where the state does not reach. Life begins without anesthesia, without exams, without medical teams, and every birth already carries a risk. The absence of a hospital is not a theory. It is a sentence repeated daily for more than 1 million people living in that vast region of northwestern Kenya. In Turkana, a simple childbirth can turn into a tragedy. An asthma attack, a fall, a mild infection. Everything becomes potentially fatal because the distance to the nearest medical center can take days. And often, there's no transport, no fuel. Only road, sun, and the body trying to endure. Most structured hospital is out of reach for most. It is in the city of Lodwar, the regional capital, but only those with luck, money, or time survive the wait. The villages scattered across the desert lack basic infrastructure. Many don't even have a support clinic. What exists are improvised structures, with one bed, one thermometer, and one hope. Sometimes not even that. Most of the population walks for hours to be seen by a single nurse who handles everything. From fever to childbirth, from infection to grief. The government's omission is not recent. It is historical. For decades, Turkana has been forgotten by public investments. The focus of the authorities is on the big cities. Power does not cross the desert. Money does not cross the desert. Only hunger, drought, and abandonment succeed. And where there is no hospital, illness spreads like wind, silent, merciless. Every day. The existing structure is maintained, in part, by religious missions and international organizations. Doctors Without Borders, the Red Cross, small NGOs. They do what they can but cannot support the public health of an entire region. Medicines, equipment, and transport are lacking. Care depends on donations, and donations are not constant. Each time a project ends, the void returns like an open wound that never heals. There's no ICU, there's no surgical center. There's no emergency room. When someone suffers a serious accident, they are placed in the back of a truck or on a mattress inside a boat when there is water, and taken to where the public system begins to function. Sometimes the patient arrives, other times not. And when they die, no one records it, no one questions, no one investigates. Death comes in silence. The mothers of Turkana learn to give birth alone or with the help of traditional midwives. Often on the clay floor, with old claws and a blade. Boiled in the fire. When complications arise, there is nothing to be done. Grief is experienced right there, without an ambulance, without a doctor, without a scalpel. The eyes of the community already know when the cry is of pain and when it is farewell. The death of a mother is not an exception. It is recurrence. But there is beauty too, small victories. When a woman survives a difficult delivery. When a community health worker manages to save a dehydrated child with homemade rehydration. When the vaccine arrives on time. These are moments that the community celebrates with clapping, music, and simple joy. The joy of those who still haven't given up. Youth grow up among clay huts and dry trees. Schools teach biology, but many students have never seen a stethoscope. They ask what a hospital is. The teacher answers with a drawing on the board. A white building, a red cross, a place that saves lives. But in practice, a hospital is just an idea, not a place they can go. The absence of a hospital also destroys time. In Turkana, everything is urgent. Everything is now. You can't wait. An infection doesn't take 7 days. It takes hours. A bleeding has no monitoring, only faith. Waiting is a luxury. And time is an enemy that runs faster than the road. When the government appears, it is to make promises. New funds, regional plans, mobile units. But the promises dry up under the same heat that burns barefoot feet on the ground. Works begin and stop. Clinics are announced but never equipped. The regional hospital is a name on signs, but reality still bleeds without dressing. The faith of the population is resilient. Many churches have become emergency care centers. Benches became beds. Bags became first aid kits. What lacks in structure overflows in will. But that alone is not enough. Faith does not replace oxygen. Compassion does not perform surgery. Courage does not prevent infection. The women of Turkana carry the weight of absence. They are the ones who treat the wounded, who improvise bandages, who walk with their children in their arms under the sun in search of help. When someone dies, they are the ones who prepare the body. When someone survives, they are the ones who give thanks. They are the silent sentinels of survival where there is no rescue. The elders of the region remember a time when there were fewer people, fewer illnesses, and even then, the abandonment was the same. The state never fully arrived. The clinics that were promised decades ago are still clay structures with tin roofs. The donated equipment stopped working. Dust covered what remained. The youth try to leave. Some manage to get scholarships to study medicine in the capital, but few return. Because returning is facing the pain of seeing your people suffering from conditions you already know how to treat. It's going back to a place where you can't perform surgery, can't insert a catheter. It's going back to helplessness. And many can't bear it. Local authorities argue that the region is remote, difficult to access. But that no longer convinces. Because where there is political or economic interest, access is built. Roads appear, resources arrive. But for Turkana, what arrives first is drought. Then oblivion. Even so, the community does not give up. Local leaders meet, demand visibility, apply pressure. Small community radios denounce. Women organize marchers. Youth record on cell phones and post to social media when they have internet. The pain no longer wants to be invisible. And resistance, even isolated, remains alive. With every child who survives an infection, with every mother who returns from childbirth holding her baby, with every life saved through improvisation, there is a silent message to the world: we deserve more. We deserve a hospital. We deserve not to die on the margins. And if these words touch something in you, don't keep them to yourself. Share them. Spread them. Because those who live where there is no hospital have already suffered in silence for far too long. And every story told can be the beginning of relief. The heat starts early in Turkana. Before 6 in the morning, the sun is already scorching the cracked earth and raising a fine dust into the air that settles on everything. The mud houses, the residents' clothes, the children's skin. At this hour, mothers are already walking with their children in their arms, seeking help for a cough that hasn't gone away, a fever that won't break, an infection that advances without asking permission. There is no hospital to go to. They walk because it's what's left. They walk for hours to the nearest outpost, which might be open, or might not. In the village of Kalikal, on the shores of Lake Turkana, a woman loses her husband to a condition that started with a headache. In less than 2 days, he was unresponsive. There was no diagnosis, no help, no ambulance. He was laid out on a mat of branches and mourned under a tree. He was young, father of 5, a fisherman. His death did not appear in any statistics. It was just another anonymous disappearance in the desert of indifference. The health outpost in Kalikal has 1 nurse. He comes twice a week if he can get fuel for his motorcycle. There's a cabinet with paracetamol, gauze, and syringes. But there is no hospital bed, number 4 fluids, no broad-spectrum antibiotics. When symptoms exceed the basics, he advises, try Lodwar. But Lodwar is over 150 kilometers away on a rough road with no regular public transportation. The advice becomes, a sentence. In that land without a hospital, Children learn early that crying doesn't help. They endure pain in their eyes, legs, ears. The norm is to wait for it to get better, wait for the body to hold on. Parents observe the color changes, the sudden fatigue, the loss of appetite. When they decide to act, it's already too late. The trip will be long, the help uncertain. And time cool. In the dry season, everything gets worse. The few mobile health centers stop circulating. The international NGO truck that brings vaccines and care disappears for weeks. Dust fills nostrils, eyes, and open wounds. Water becomes scarcer and dirtier. Diarrhea multiplies. Bodies dehydrate. And what could be solved with a hydration station becomes a backyard funeral. There's a young woman named Nakhil who lost her first child at 8 months due to a respiratory infection. She couldn't get medical care. For her second child, she learned to do steam inhalations with hot leaves. For the third, she improvised a necklace of herbs, taught by her grandmother. For the fourth, she walked for 8 hours carrying the boy in her arms to an improvised dispensary. He survived. She calls it a miracle, and maybe it is. But no miracle should replace a hospital. The men of Turkana know they can't afford to get injured. They work with wood, fishing, construction. They wear no protective equipment. A poorly treated cut can become infected in just a few hours. A broken bone cannot be properly set. They learn to tie cloths, use sticks as splints, to endure. When the pain wins, there is no morphine. There is silence and shame. Even without a hospital, the community organizes itself. On some nights, the women gather in circles to share recipes, stories, prayers. They exchange medicinal plants, teach how to make ointments, how to control bleeding with charcoal powder. One has lost 2 children, another, a sister. All know someone who died without treatment. These gatherings are a collective attempt to heal in the absence of the state. The government sends representatives from time to time. They speak of future buildings, support centers, structural plans. They leave banners, hand out pamphlets, take photos. But the resources disappear before turning into concrete. People have learned not to believe. They smile for the cameras and go back to boiling water in a drum. Promises don't feed. They don't heal. Schools try to teach about health, but the content seems like science fiction. Students draw human bodies and learn the names of bones, but they've never seen an X-ray. They talk about vaccination, but have no fixed calendar. When a teacher gets sick, they are absent for weeks. And when they die, they are replaced without ceremony. Absence has become normalized. One of the few ambulances in the region has been broken for over 6 months. Parts are missing. Parts are missing because funding is missing. And funding doesn't come because priority reports always place Turkana at the bottom of the list. When an emergency occurs, residents improvise transport with wheelbarrows, bicycles, human backs. Sometimes, someone gets a paid ride in a pickup truck. But that costs the equivalent of a month of food. Even so, there is hope. A young man named Lamaria, who grew up in Turkana, got a scholarship to study nursing in Nairobi. He said he will return. He said he wants to open a health center in his village. It is a shared dream. Every step he takes in the capital is followed by hopeful eyes. He carries the weight of an entire region that needs someone who knows the pain and how to care for it. Meanwhile, life goes on. Weddings are celebrated with singing, even if the bride lost a brother due to lack of care. Birthdays are marked with flower and dancing, even if a cousin lies in a coma with no hospital. Joy is simple, persistent, stubborn. It survives as a form of resistance. Local authorities are aware of the reality, but they justify it with reports, with numbers, with the complexity of the territory. They say Turkana is too big, too remote, too dry. As if geography were an excuse for abandonment. As if being hard to reach were a reason not to try. Distance is not an obstacle when there is political will. But will does not appear in spreadsheets. Pastors in the region often become health counselors. They help organize community campaigns, make visits, pray with the sick. They themselves have no medical training but try to fill the void. Some study books, take online courses when there's cell signal. One of them learned how to identify malaria symptoms and teach how to boil the right herbs. His church became a reference. Not spiritual, but clinical. The lack of a hospital has another cruel consequence: shame. Many residents believe it's their fault. That misery is a punishment. That pain is a divine test. When a child dies, some mothers blame themselves for not walking far enough in time, as if it were their sole responsibility to save a life. The system ignored. The cycle repeats, year after year. Promise after promise. Death after death. But no one wants to leave. Turkana is home, is land, is origin. People don't want to escape. They want to exist with dignity. They want to give birth safely. They want to know that if an accident happens, there will be help. They want the minimum, and while the hospital doesn't come, Turkana survives with what it has. Between the scorching sun and the dust that covers everything, pulses a people who still resist. Because to resist, there is the only way to live. The day begins with the sound of dragging footsteps over dry soil. In the heart of Turkana, no one expects relief. The heat spreads even before the sun rises high, and bodies walk out of necessity, not habit. A man sits under the shade of a thorny tree, sweating silently, holding his abdomen with both hands. The pain started days ago. But where there is no hospital, pain has nowhere to go. It simply grows, shifts places, and asserts its presence. The walk to Lodwar, where there is some hospital structure, is too long for someone already weakened. And the village's motorcycle is out of fuel. Other residents know they can't do much. They offer water, a clean cloth, a handful of dried herbs to chew, and they wait. In silence. Because there, when pain appears, there's no ambulance, no emergency room, no medical shift. There's only time. And in Turkana, time can heal or kill, depending on luck. In the village of Lokitong, a small, improvised clinic serves as a meeting point between pain and hope. There, two professionals do what they can with what they have. One studied in Eldoret and returned to try to improve conditions in the place where he grew up. The other came from outside, through an international aid program. They don't have resources nor modern equipment, but they have listening, patience, practical knowledge, and a discipline forged in urgency. The clinic structure is precarious. Wooden walls with gaps where dust and heat seep in. There's no consistent electricity, no beds with proper mattresses. The only medication stock fits on a plastic shelf. When professionals request more supplies, they are told the truck didn't come. The fund ran out, and they should improvise once again. In the central market of one of the villages, a charcoal vendor faints against his cart. Friends carry him to the headquarters of a small community organization that provides first aid. He suffered a drop in blood pressure caused by exhaustion and lack of clean water. He was treated with a fan made of leaves and a wet cloth. There were no tests, no diagnosis. When he improved, he went back to work. Because stopping is a luxury, and those who rely on their own effort can't afford that right. Turkana is marked by this perverse logic. The most resilient survive, but not unscathed. The absence of a hospital marks bodies with poorly healed scars, compromised joints, infections that leave lasting damage. Those who fracture a limb rarely have it rehabilitated properly. Those who suffer severe burns carry the mark forever. Health there is a favor of fate, not a constitutional right. There are herders who have abandoned their flocks to accompany a sick relative to Lodwar. When they return, the cattle have scattered. The local economy is fragile, and poor health directly impacts survival. Those who are sick for too long become poorer. Those who care for the sick do too. Illness spreads, not just in the body, but in sustenance and stability. The absence of a hospital also prevents simple diagnoses. No one knows for sure what they have. Severe pain could be a serious infection or just dehydration. A fainting spell could be anemia, low blood sugar, or something worse. But ignorance prevails, and ignorance costs dearly. Fear becomes daily life. And in TURKANA, fear has no face, it has absence. Even those who don't fall ill feel the pressure. At any moment, an accident can happen. A fall, a cut, a sprain. And everyone knows that the time between injury and care might be longer than the body can withstand. This creates a strange kind of caution, a restrained life, where risk is always avoided, not out of prudence, but because of helplessness. The regional government has been there before. They sent vehicles with banners, technicians with spreadsheets, speeches with promises. They talked about semi-intensive care units, mobile service programs, modernization. Everything remained on paper. The structures never came. The cars went back. The residents were left with another photo on the wall and even less faith in the next visit. Some older residents say they expected the hospital to come before they grew old. Now, they don't expect it anymore. They've learned to deal with the possible. They've placed more trust in traditional wisdom, in boiled roots, in compresses made from sand and leaves. And even when they don't believe in it, they follow the ritual, because doing something, anything, is better than waiting with arms crossed for a system that never came. On Sundays, a small church also serves as a center of support. During services, some volunteers take turns checking blood pressure, handing out painkillers, and giving advice on home care for open wounds and skin infections. Liturgy blends with care. And what should be the state becomes the duty of faith. Those who care for the sick also face emotional absence. Watching a relative deteriorate without consistent medical help takes an invisible toll. It generates frustration, guilt, helplessness. And in small communities, where everyone knows each other, suffering is shared. There is solidarity, but there is also exhaustion. Abandonment multiplies in the eyes of those who care without knowing how to help. The lack of structure also turns what should be routine into an event. When a healthcare worker from another city arrives, residents form lines, even without knowing if they'll be seen. Some come because of real pain. Others come out of fear, prevention, or hope. But time is short, resources are limited, and many return without answers. This frustrated wait undermines trust in institutions, even when there is genuine effort. By those who make the journey. Communication between villages is poor. Some people don't even know there's a clinic elsewhere in the region. Others have heard of it, but don't know how to get there. Geography complicates everything. Dirt, roads, scorching heat, hostile vegetation. Those who try to leave in search of help risk more than their body. They risk the little energy they still have. Some local merchants have created emergency support networks. They store gasoline for emergency motorcycles, collect money among themselves to fund transportation, maintain buckets with clean water and basic kits with gauze, alcohol, and tape. They are not doctors, not firefighters. They are organized survivors. And they are more efficient than any state plan ever implemented. The absence of a hospital also shapes collective memory. The stories passed from generation to generation speak of pain, loss, and improvisation, but there is also pride. Pride of those who survived without help, of those who carried a neighbor to the road, of those who comforted someone in agony without knowing if they would make it. These stories shape TURKANA's identity, a people who resist, not because they want to, but because they had no choice. And despite all this, dignity has not died. Residents walk upright. They work under the sun with their heads held high. They share what they have. They don't beg. They ask for structure. They ask for the basics. They ask for what is already a right. But they learn to wait, and while they wait, they build silent networks of care and survival. At the last community meeting, one of the residents stood up and said firmly, "Until they come to rescue us, we will take care of each other as we always have, but let them know we are alive, and we will keep demanding." The phrase was repeated in chorus. No one there wants charity, they want respect. They want life with dignity. In the early hours of the morning, the wind lifts a dust so fine it seems to stick to the skin. It's the kind of heat that gives no respite, even in the shade. But no one in Turkana complains about the weather. They complain, instead, about the silence of the authorities, the delays in any response, and the lack of structure that turns what should be simple into something complicated. Life goes on, but not without wear. Not without the weight of knowing that if something happens, there won't be a safe place to be treated. The day moves slowly for those living without assistance. The journey of someone who wakes up with pain or some physical limitation is usually twofold. First, endure. Then, try to resolve. The paths to the small health units are long and uneven. And even upon arrival, there's often no professional available, or the service is limited to general advice. Basic medications aren't always in stock. Frustration comes in silence, and the body must make do with what it has. In local markets and fairs, vendors look after one another. One helps another set up the stall, unload sacks, carry water. There's a collective awareness that nothing can be counted on beyond solidarity. Someone who felt unwell yesterday is there again today, working, because there's no alternative. Rest is scarce, and recovery is partial. Everything depends on inner strength and luck. Many workers deal with situations of constant physical exhaustion. The excessive heat, dehydration, and insufficient nutrition form a draining cycle. Yet still, everyone maintains the posture of those who move forward. The body responds slowly with visible limitations, but there's no complaining. Resilience in Turkana is quiet, silent, and constant. During church gatherings, in addition to the celebrations, there is time reserved for sharing difficulties. The temple becomes a space of listening. There, not only is faith shared, but also the accumulated pain of the week, doubts, paths attempted without success. Religious leaders have become figures of both spiritual and community reference. In some villages, they're the ones who carry notes with pleas for help to local radio stations. The community radio station in Lokakar is one of the few forms of communication between villages. There, messages are broadcast with names, dates, and requests for medical aid, transportation, or basic supplies. Many times, it's through that station that information about a vaccination campaign or the arrival of a health professional reaches those who need it. The radio is simple, but effective. And it saves time, something precious when everything depends on it. Life revolves around improvisation. A fisherman who recently injured his foot was treated with warm water and bitter leaves, as it was the only treatment possible at the time. A group of peers took turns in the following days to care for him while he couldn't walk. The man didn't complain. He only gave thanks. For him, having been helped was a gift. The basics there are worth their weight in gold. The promises made by authorities during previous visits still echo among the residents. They said that a new unit with full structure would be built in 2021. They announced funds, showed blueprints, but construction never began. And now, the residents carry a prudent distrust. They don't reject help, but they don't expect much either. They've learned that speeches don't guarantee care. Faith remains a psychological and moral support. Many say it was faith that kept them going when the body failed. Prayer replaces rest. Hope fills the space of what cannot be controlled. In every corner of Turkana, there's a small candle burning, not literal, but symbolic, kept alive by the collective strength of those who chose to stay despite the absence. Along the dirt trails connecting the villages, people can be seen carrying buckets, packages, or simply walking. Each step is part of an invisible struggle. The lack of public transportation, mobile care units, or any efficient form of emergency response makes everything depend on physical endurance. Those who walk must be willing to face the distance and their own limits. Some community groups have started to form lists of people with basic first aid knowledge. They are men and women who, even without formal training, know how to make compresses, control minor bleeding, and give guidance about warning signs. These networks formed on their own in an attempt to lessen the consequences of abandonment. They are the closest thing to continuous healthcare services. Time, in Turkana, has a different meaning. It's not divided into hours or appointments. It's measured according to the body, when it will hold up, when it will react, when it will improve. Everything is uncertain. Someone who is well today may not be tomorrow. And whoever needs help, needs it quickly. But speed doesn't exist when the most urgent resource is exactly what's missing. Conversations among residents almost always touch on the topic of health. This is lacking, that is lacking. What did you use to get better? Or, do you know anyone who can give an injection? Are common questions. Health has become an everyday topic, not because people chose to talk about it, but because there's no way to avoid it. Where there is no structure, improvisation becomes the common language. There are also signs of organization. In a village near the lake, residents decided to set aside part of the local income to build a shelter that could accommodate emergencies until external help arrives. The space is still under construction, made of mud and reused tiles, but it already represents something important: autonomy. It's the attempt to protect themselves in the face of a state that doesn't protect. Some residents have gotten support from contacts in other cities and started sending letters and videos denouncing the situation. These are courageous attempts to be heard. Most of these initiatives get no response, but a few have been shared by international organizations. And even though the infrastructure hasn't arrived, the feeling of being seen already provides some psychological relief. Around the artisan wells, spontaneous gatherings form. People exchange reports about what worked in terms of care, which medicines appeared, where it was possible to get advice. These spaces have organically become centers of emotional and logistical support. No one planned it. But where the state doesn't reach, the community builds its own roots. What is most striking in Turkana is not the suffering. It is the resilience. The calm with which people face the absurd. The firmness with which they keep planting, selling, teaching, helping. There is no hysteria, no spectacle. There is life. A life marked by constant effort, but also by the dignity of those who have decided not to fall. Turkana is still waiting for a hospital. Not out of luxury, not out of vanity, but out of right. The people there have done their part. They work, care, educate, share, insist. What's missing is for the government to do its part. What's missing is infrastructure, presence, commitment. But while that doesn't arrive, the residents carry on, supported by something money can't buy, the certainty that it is worth fighting, even when everything seems to say otherwise. And it is that certainty that keeps Turkana alive. Not the hospital that never came, not the promise that was never fulfilled, but the hope built with sweat, effort, and humanity. A place that, even forgotten, remains standing. Because where structure is lacking, courage rises. And where the state's care is missing, care among people makes everything go on. In Turkana, time does not heal everything. It only confirms what everyone there already knows, that the prolonged absence of essential infrastructure is not an accident. It is a result. A result of choices, of inverted priorities, of distances used as excuses. Over the years, what was meant to be temporary has solidified as permanent, and what was supposed to be an exception has become routine. And even so, the region hasn't stopped living. The scars left by the absence of a hospital are not only visible on the body. They are in decisions, in glances, in the paths taken. They are in the way each resident plans their day, knowing that any unforeseen event may have no solution. They are in the memory of promises that arrived with speeches and left without foundation. And they are, above all, in the silent way life has been reorganized to exist without what should be basic. People of Turkana do not ask for much. They ask for respect. They ask for presence. They ask for the chance to access what is already guaranteed by law. Care when needed. Support when necessary. Dignity in moments of vulnerability. This is not about charity. It is about repair. It is not about favor. It is about commitment. Throughout this region's history, many have said it would be difficult. That the terrain was hostile. That the logistics were complex. That the investment wasn't worth it. But none of these explanations justify the abandonment. Where there is will, there is a way. And where structure has been absent for so long, there is no excuse that can lighten the responsibility of those who could act and chose not to. Even in the face of all this, TURKANA has built something that no externally imposed policy could ever achieve: a culture of mutual support. When one resident falls ill, another helps. When a group organizes an initiative, others contribute. Solidarity there is not rhetoric, it is practice. A way to resist what should be intolerable. Community spaces have become centers of care. The shade of trees has become places of comfort. The dusty paths have turned into corridors of mutual giving. And even if the state has stepped away, the sense of collectiveness remains present. That is strength. That is humanity. That is what keeps Turkana alive. There's a profound lesson hidden in the routines of these people. They do not expect the impossible, but they also do not settle. They continue caring, organizing, trying, because they understand that the absence of help cannot become the absence of reaction. The fight is quiet, but firm. And that, in itself, is already a revolution. Omission, however, comes at a cost. The delay in care reflects in productivity, in emotional stability, in social organization. The lack of diagnosis prevents prevention. The lack of infrastructure interrupts paths. And the prolonged silence about it deepens the gap between the center and the margins. It is a disconnection that harms more than any illness. Despite this, when we talk about Turkana, we are not talking about despair. We are talking about resistance. We are not talking about weakness. We are talking about adaptation. Each resident who rises early to follow their routine is a firm response to everything that has been missing. Life goes on. And it is not just any life. It is a life that refuses to vanish. Anyone who passes through and observes without prejudice understands that the people there do not want to be saved. They want to be included. They want to be remembered. They want to be on the map of decisions, not just in photo campaigns for donations, because Turkana has history, has culture, has voice. What is missing is for it to be listened to seriously, local. Organizations and civil movements continue trying to open paths. They collect data, organize reports, hold meetings. They have not managed to solve everything, but they have done more than many governments that made promises and never delivered. And this silent, constant, real effort is what keeps everything from collapsing. Each story of resilience lived there carries the weight of what should never have been necessary. No one should have to walk for hours to be seen by a doctor. One should have to depend on luck to receive basic care. No one should have to reorganize their life around absence. But in Turkana, that is the reality. And even so, dignity persists. The scenario can change. What's missing is action. It is decision. It is transforming promises into projects, reports into practices, budgets into tangible infrastructure. Until that happens, people keep living, not because they have everything they need, but because they've learned to make the most of what little they have. The rebuilding of a region does not start with machines, it starts with respect. It starts with listening, with presence, with genuine commitment from those in power. The people of Turkana have already shown they can contribute. Now they need others to contribute with them. The absence of a hospital is not just the absence of equipment. It is the absence of official hope. And that is exactly what needs to change. Turkana deserves more than occasional recognition. It deserves permanent infrastructure. It deserves the right to live with peace of mind. The story of this region cannot be told only through absences. It must also be remembered through the hands that reached out, the eyes that watched over, the voices that refused to be silenced. Turkana is not a portrait of misery. It is a portrait of mature resistance, of silent organization, of faith in the collective. The message coming from there is clear. Life exists, even where infrastructure does not. But it should not depend only on individual effort. The responsibility to provide access to healthcare does not belong to the population. It belongs to public power. And with every day that passes without it, the abandonment renews itself. If this story touched you in any way, don't let it disappear. Sharing is the first step to breaking the silence. And no change begins without someone, somewhere, deciding that this cannot go on. Let that decision begin now.